Kathleen, I'll start with you. There's a couple of things to analyze here. First, the platforms that are out, and second, the platform that isn't out, and the fact that it isn't. I want to start on the former. And I think for the NDP, like, nobody is out there crying like, oh no, so much spending. Like, it's on brand. I think they've made a point throughout the campaign of saying we're not going to cut. We're not, we believe now's the time for investment. I think the Liberal stuff came as more of a surprise only because of the rhetoric employed over the last 2 months by Mark Carney. Like, there's been a clear pivot away from Justin Trudeau, away from, for example, the carbon tax and capital gains, in what I think was perceived, maybe incorrectly, as a move to the center. The platform doesn't necessarily feel that way.
Well, it doesn't feel like it has the kind of restraint that you're hearing in the tone and how Carney describes his potential future government. And also, unlike New Democrats, the Carney platform doesn't actually outline tons of revenue measures, right? So New Democrats are coming at it saying, listen, we're going to spend on these things because we think they're important with all the Trump threats. We think we need to make the investments in healthcare. We think we need to help people find a doctor, find a nurse, all that kind of stuff. But we're going to pay for it by having this high wealth tax. We're going to look at our tax system to make it more equitable, to make it more just. You don't really see that same kind of balance in the Liberal platform currently. And we don't see a platform at all from the Conservatives, which I know you pointed out, but I actually just want to back up for a bit because I think there was a serious discussion that was happening 3 or 4 months ago in the lead up to these elections, knowing that they were going to happen sometime in 2025, whether we would even have platforms. So the fact that we have 2 out of 3 out right now is impressive because I think right now people almost didn't expect platforms like, media have fallen off some of the political tours, the Conservatives in particular, whether we would see a platform. We haven't seen them in some of the provincial campaigns. And so the fact that actually 2 of the major parties have platforms out, looks like we'll have one from the Conservatives tomorrow, is noteworthy.
Well, I think that actually is really noteworthy, Dan, because I've listened to a lot of the analysis even right now about the lack of a strategic imperative for actually releasing these, right? Like, it takes you off, essentially. You're like, for the Liberals, you're messaging around Donald Trump for a few days because you're getting questions about the things that perhaps don't add up in the platform. For the Conservatives, it will take them off the message of affordability because the same accountability questions will be thrown their way tomorrow. And like Kathleen says, there are in provincial elections, parties who have decided against doing this thing because it doesn't serve their kind of naked political interests, which ultimately are necessary to win an election. Are you surprised that this stuff did come out and that we are anticipated to get one tomorrow?
I'm not surprised that the Liberals released a platform. I think this is probably relatively to the election platforms that the Trudeau Liberals would have released in the last 3 elections, a much smaller document, a much more focused document. And I think aspirationally was seeking to recenter the conversation and their plan back on a conversation about Donald Trump, trade, tariffs, and the future of this country. And in many ways, they did that. But it was also a more expansive document than that. We have to acknowledge. And I think that's the premise of your question, Vassie, is why did they release a comprehensive platform? I would say that they clearly felt 2 things. One, that there was a need to, in advance of an election that looks like they're about to win a pretty sizable government through, to put forward a plan for governing and a plan for that post-election period. And secondly, I think that they're looking to speak to a broad coalition of voters, right? I mean, there are a lot of Canadians who are identifying a support for the Liberal Party in the lead up to this election, and many of them vote for other traditional progressive parties, right? The Liberals and the Conservatives are tracking to win 80% of the vote in this election. That means a heck of a lot of New Democrats and Bloc Québécois voters have come to the Liberals, and to hold that coalition together, they need to put forward a plan that speaks to progressive values broadly, and I think that was the second box they were looking to check here. I do think they did both. I would say that the imperative for them now becomes getting back to a conversation about Donald Trump. That's the reason they're winning this election. They need to recenter the conversation there, and I think we'll see them do that in the days ahead.
And just to be clear, I am a huge advocate for the platforms coming out because I like to know what I'm asking the questions about. I just meant sort of for naked political purposes. Shakir, I'll get your thoughts on what Dan just laid out because it does make sense. Like, they're talking more about spending on stuff and not cutting because they need to solidify the vote with the traditional New Democrat voters who are, the Liberal vote is a bit softer. If that's the political sort of purpose of the document for the Liberals, what might tomorrow's be for the Conservatives, and why the heck haven't they released it yet?
So we'll see what happens with the Conservatives. But I think, so 2 things. I think, one, I'm of the camp that, platforms don't need to be released. I think it causes more risks than reward for these political parties. I think to what Dan was talking about, I actually think for Mark Carney, it actually opens a little bit of a vulnerability, because I do think one of his selling points was this competent economic manager, right? Aside from Donald Trump, this guy just knows the books, knows money, etc. But he's spending more than what Trudeau was kind of putting out there, and it makes you ask the question if he's that much different from Justin Trudeau in terms of just economic management. So I think it actually caused him a little more harm than benefit for him. I think if you're Pierre Poilievre, I think one of the things he's going to have a challenge with tomorrow is the same negative kind of stories coming out of this, out of his platform. He's made it very clear, for every dollar that he spends, there's going to be some associated cut. You know, the opposition is going to frame it as, austerity, a bunch of cuts coming from the Conservatives. And instead of talking about affordability, instead of talking about a change in government, he has to spend the day defending how he gets to a path to balance. I think we've all seen campaigns, we've all been in elections here. Getting to a path to balance is not painless, right? There are going to be things that have to be in there that are not going to be things you want to be talking about. So I just don't think there's a lot of value for these parties to be putting out these comprehensive platforms a week out from a campaign, E-Day, sorry. And I think if you look at someone like Premier Ford, even in his last election, I think he had like, what was it, a 10, 12-page platform, which was good enough to kind of have voters understand what he was going to do. It got the media coverage they needed to get, and it still got him to victory. So I think, you can do well with a shorter platform. You don't need 60, 70 pages of all this depth, of all this spending. I think get to the point and stay on your message to kind of win the election.
Yeah, I get it from a political perspective, Hannah, but I get lots of feedback, particularly on radio, from people who want to know the specifics of what each party is proposing, particularly, I think, against the backdrop of the framing of the election from all of the parties, which is that this is such a monumental one, right? Such an impactful one. They are eager, because they're so engaged, to figure out where everybody stands. I get what Shakir is saying 100%, but I do think there is interest.
Absolutely. I'm going to agree with the political strategists on this panel. That is a strategy that would work. But for Canadians who are sitting at home still going, oh my gosh, who do I vote for? There is one party in there, and that's the Conservatives, who may have missed a moment. And I'm going to say that the Conservatives may have missed a moment because the polls are still in the favor of the Liberals. And what Pierre Poilievre has to do, the Conservative leader, is try to convince others, those undecided voters, to come to their side. If you look at the amount of people who cast their ballot on Friday, the 2 million number, and compare that to what happened in 2021, in 2021, nearly 40% of the electorate cast their ballot in advance, at advance polls and in ballots ahead of time. That means they are out of the mix. They cannot be convinced to come over to any political party. By putting this out so late for Mr. Poilievre, I feel he could have missed a moment where he could have grabbed on to some of those voters. On the other hand, I do hear what everyone is saying, is that look at what happened to Mr. Carney in this. He's been taken completely off message. When it comes to the Conservatives, they actually got a couple of days to continue to hammer him. They're on the change. They want to present change because they're saying he's the same as Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau had been shown that he had spent a lot of money. And when you look at Mr. Carney's platform, it's just a ton of cash that's going to be spent. And maybe people can start going, oh, then potentially they have that change. Okay, maybe Mr. Poilievre is the one to go to. So maybe just by waiting and using that strategy and continue to kind of hammer Mr. Carney on the budgetary side of this, that will help the Conservatives. But with the polls, still showing that the Liberals are still in the lead, I think Mr. Poilievre has to do anything possible to convince voters to come to his side. And by waiting to launch a platform, the day after advance polls, I think it's a strategy that may not work for Mr. Poilievre in trying to convince other people to come over to the Conservatives.